Good morning, YouTubers. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Just wanted to give you a little bit of update of what's been happening over the last few days. I spent pretty much the entire day yesterday in the library putting the final touches on an outline for the complaint to the Federal Trade Commission against Patreon, PayPal, and Stripe. It was a lot of work, but something that's needed because I have now a team of attorneys and law students I need to work with, as well as some business analysts that I need to actually present them, not only with an outline of how the whole thing will actually look like, but also then be able to divide up the segments into workable questions that each person can answer. So it gives everybody some measure of direction. The one thing you find out is that the challenge in working with this kind of organization is, in fact, well, it's not really an organization, right? I mean, we are a bunch of disparate people, common interests, but we have no particular obligation toward one another. Everybody's volunteering toward a single common cause, but beyond that, nobody's required to do anything. And if you actually met some of these people, you'd be very impressed to realize how incredibly brilliant some of these people are, and their work and their accomplishments are very, very impressive. But the fact is, when you got a lot of very smart people working on one thing, it's very easy to get distracted. You start thinking about, where should we be in 6 months, a year, 2 years from now? How can we turn this into a full-scale organization? When in reality, we need to focus on what's ahead of us, right? So we need to focus on what we do in the next week, in the next 30 days, maybe 90 days, but not look so far in the front that we lose sight of trying to accomplish, to actually deliver on a specific product, which is the complaint to the FTC, and making sure that there's enough support for it so the FTC actually takes on the project and actually start an investigation, which is ultimately what we all want to. So that was basically what I put the final touches on, and I completed, and I should be circulating that among the legal and potentially the business group over the next day or so, once I understand how to divide it up and who's involved in what aspect of it to make it certain. But I want to give you a little bit of a window into what the complaints look like, because basically what I started with is looking at a bunch of complaints, the kind of complaints other companies, other individuals, other not-for-profit organizations have submitted to the Federal Trade Commission over the past decade to see how it's organized. And as you can imagine, the organization is pretty much identical. You start with a summary, you then discuss the parties, you know, who are the parties involved, not only on our side, but also on the respondent side, who is on basically what you would normally call a defendant. And then you start talking about the facts, just laying out the facts, what actually happened, and then you get into the legal matter, really the heart of what you're arguing. And then there is basically a conclusion where you tell the FTC, this is why you have jurisdiction over the matter, this is why you should be handling this matter, and this is really what we want you to do afterwards, which is basically a combination of an injunction and an investigation to actually take a look into what's going on, to make sure that what we suspect doesn't happen, or at least if it did, it is stopped, so that the competitive of the marketplace can actually be preserved. Now, as you can imagine, the most difficult part of it all is actually the legal argument in there. And as you get into it, you realize, well, I thought I would be going in this direction, maybe it's in that direction. It's not always clear when you're first starting what direction you're going to. Now, ultimately, there's still two main claims, one dealing with collusion, the other one dealing with illegal behavior as a monopoly. Two different things we talk about, but one of the things I was questioning as I was going through is really looking at the collusive part of it all, is really whether or not this is what's called a vertical restraint on trade or a horizontal restraint of trade on trade, because identifying that changes the standards of what you have to prove. Are we looking at it basically as Patreon working with PayPal in order to stop competition horizontally from Patreon? Or is this really more of a vertical, which is a collusive behavior between two vertically situated company, Patreon and PayPal? So determining which one of that actually determines what kind of legal standards you're actually pursuing. Now, that can be determined as we go along. Over time, I'm changing my opinion of which one it is. Is it horizontal, is it vertical? That will work itself out as more attorneys are looking at it and more people are opining on it. We'll probably get that out over the next few weeks as we make some determinations. But what's interesting is ultimately this legal standard. How do you prove the collusion here? And there are two real legal standards here. One is what's called per se, and the other one is a rule of reason. There are very few instances which fall under what's called a per se. The idea is that without really too much explanation, if you can prove that this happened, it's just illegal. Explanations really don't matter at that point. It's just illegal. As opposed to rule of reason, where it's only illegal if you can basically exclude all reasonable alternative to why they behaved that way. There was a business reason for it. It was logically related to what they were doing. Maybe it was an expression of free speech. You're trying to exclude. So obviously getting a per se ruling is far more favorable because you don't have to explain a lot. You don't have to get behind the reasons why they do it versus a rule of reason kind of standard where you have to get into all of that. And the way I approach it, which is really the way most attorneys approach it, is you plan for the per se, but you really are prepared for the rule of reason. You really want to build out the entire argument of the rule of reason, showing why the actions that we see by Patreon against Sargon of Akkad, and in retaliation by PayPal against Subscribestar and Stripe as well against Subscribestar, basically cannot be explained through any reasonable means. That there is no rational basis for it. There's no business reasons for it. It's not an expressive action by them under the concept of freedom of speech. So you want to build your entire argument under the rule of reason. Hopefully you can get it under the per se, so that it's just illegal per se, but you also build a cogent and strong argument under the rule of reason. That's kind of like where the outline works out, basically how I build it up and what I'm going to share. Maybe over time I'll be able to share some of those documents with you so you guys can actually see what we're working on. But right now, since it's really preliminarily, no point in sharing a document that probably is going to change a lot over the next few weeks. So I hope this is helpful to you. Any questions, any concerns, anything you want to discuss, just leave them down below. I'd love to talk to you. See you next time.